So we've had you in the past on our show, and we've discussed different things such as flat Earth and updates on what's going on with the Mars exploration. We are celebrating 50 years of the moon landing, and I originally contacted you because of two movies. I saw the first ridiculous one that it wasn't even well done. If you're gonna make a conspiracy theory movie, at least do your best. It was actually very cheaply done, and then the guy who was supposed to be pretending to go to the moon, I wouldn't even trust him with my dog. And the whole idea was that there was a CIA group who was trying to get footage of the moon landing without being in the moon because they ran out of time or money to be able to do it. And that so it was like a recreation of what could have happened before the moon landing. And you sent me a video where a filmmaker shows that there's a lot of problems with that being a possibility. But can you tell us what was your experience when the moon landing happened? I don't mean to assume that you were around, but
No, I was. And without doing any math, I was about 9 years old when we landed on the moon. And it was just very, very exciting because, growing up in that, it was a lot of space was happening. And that was the only reason they would haul a TV into your classroom in those days was to watch something going on in space. So it was just a huge deal. And to see us land on the moon, you're like, okay, this is the future. We really are going to space. And I think a lot of people my age, we expected we'd be doing vacations in space by now. It was the space age, which we kind of took a detour and did other things instead. Nobody saw personal computers coming or cell phones or any of the technology that we hang around with now. And but we didn't go to space. That didn't happen. So, I get really enthusiastic, especially when I'm talking to kids, and they often ask me, have I been to space? Because I guess I'm so excited about it. And I go, no, I'm still waiting for my first ride. And I can't believe it's been 50 years. But that was it was science fiction. It was just amazing stuff to watch.
So the second movie I watched was First Man. The first one was Project Avalanche, and I don't recommend it. There was a French one that was similar. But First Man was actually really good, and it showed how difficult it was and how easy it was to get to the moon, in the sense of like once you get the physics figure out and you do multiple tests on Earth, then it's just kind of like a one-shot deal to do it. But my concern for the moon landing being real is that as a cameraman, if you're showing live feed, and they did have a couple of accidents before they got there, what would have happened as they're sending the signal and the crew blows up or the ship blows up? Wasn't that really risky to be doing it live? Couldn't it have been that maybe they recorded it days before or something, or they had a button like in live TV where it's a 5-minute delay? Because it would have been very traumatic to see everybody die. Like I saw everybody die during the, what was the one in 1985? The
Challenger, yep.
I saw that on TV as a kid, and it was traumatic. So just imagine having the moon landing go like that.
Yeah, and Challenger did affect. I talked to a number of people, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I'd go up to space, and they go, no, I saw Challenger, and I go, well, okay, I understand that, and it is risky, and it was risky. Although the risky parts of space travel really are takeoff and landing. If some bad thing were going to happen, it would have been on the landing. So you could have crashed. You could have. They didn't have a whole lot of fuel left on board. So explosions could have happened when you took back off again. There are opportunities for that, but generally, if you're not doing takeoff and landing, the rest of it's pretty good. So once they were actually on the moon, That was good, and then that was probably going to be good until they took off. And then, of course, coming back through the Earth's atmosphere is another huge problem. And you're not going to remember probably, but when they brought Apollo 13 back, they had no idea how much damage that heat shield on the bottom had taken during their actual explosion. And it was a really long radio blackout. Like, they were starting to sweat quite a bit on that because, we're waiting for them to come back, waiting to see the parachutes, and it just took a long time. And sometimes you think, well, maybe it's just feeling long because, we're so anxious about it, but it actually was a long time before they could get them back on the radio and say, hi, you guys are still with us, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it was risky, but, and we didn't have, I want to say there wasn't, I think the live part of the landing was purely radio. I think later we got back the video on that. I don't remember, and I'd have to go look, that they were actually showing, because I don't think they had a good way to transmit that. So while they recorded their landing, I think all we were hearing was the audio at that time.
That answers my question, because I'm like, how did they bounce off a signal from the moon live? Like, it seemed like the technology wasn't there. And maybe it's Hollywood that there's the problem, because they always show you in the movies that there's a family sitting in front of the TV set and they're watching people land on the moon. Like, that's impossible. Like, they even now it would be difficult to transmit from the moon to here.
Yeah, that would be a challenge. And so the camera that you saw Neil step down on, that he actually pulled the chain to, and you may have seen this in First Man, to let that fold down. And that camera was talking to one of our Deep Space Network dishes. In fact, it was talking to Australia. And so they were using a giant radio telescope to listen for the signal from that camera. So it wasn't even beamed back in the way that we would think like satellite TV or something comes to us today. They actually had to use a very large radio dish. And then they had to do some electronic stuff so they could take it from the radio dish to actually put it out to broadcast. So, yeah, that wasn't easy, and it was really primitive technology in so many ways. And you can see that. I mean, some of the footage we see now, too, has been cleaned up quite a bit. People have gone back and taken out some of the noise and, just shined it up a bit. And, it didn't look good, but this was 1969, and we were kind of used to TV from strange, weird places. Even if you were doing a transatlantic broadcast, it wasn't perfect. Now we're really used to stuff looking good. And I don't even know if a lot of times when they're reporting, even some of the satellite connections now don't have the time lag they used to have. But so it's amazing how far it's come. But yeah, some of the stuff when you see it in the movies, they're showing you things that were recorded, but we weren't getting that live. Because that would have been tough.
It goes back to my line about ancient aliens and all these problematic programs where they have no faith in humanity. So the aliens, the conspiracies, they're the ones that drive progress, not human beings. And these are people that don't even know how the radio signal works. And so, of course, it has to be the aliens, or of course it was a hoax. Because it's amazing that we can transmit even a cell phone signal. Is wild that we're all getting waves all around, and that it works. Sometimes you get like an old radio or some old television equipment, and you turn it on, and it seems almost magical. But it's there. We have the ability to take these forces of nature and make them work for our purposes. And somehow now people are saying, no, it's all fake. How? Like, we're actually very fortunate to have the ability to figure these things out. Or even the weirder stuff with the flat earth, where everything is super fantastical, and that we are only getting a small piece of this amazing stuff. It's like, well, that's just overboard. We have amazing things, but they say that even the sun is fake and everything's fake. And so do you experience that with children now? Like, as you give presentations, are they so in the sci-fi mode or in the CGI mode that they're not even willing to try to figure out the world that has already been figured out for them or has already been fantasized so much that they have a hard time processing information?
I think part of the problem is we really do a poor job of teaching science in a way that's understandable. Nobody needs to all learn quantum physics. That's not useful for most people. But it is useful to learn sort of the basics of how things work. And we do a lousy job of teaching that. And so a lot of the knowledge is so specialized that, if you ask people, where does your electricity come from? They say the wall. And so, okay, you go, no, that's not, yes, it does, but there's a process to get it there. And definitely cell phones are magic for most people. So it would be interesting, and maybe I ought to ask an engineer friend to do something like this, to go through the entire process and say, okay, when I speak into this microphone, what happens to my voice that then can translate that to whatever electrons are going to travel around, and how does that get reassembled at the end? And sort of put it out in a little, this box, and then this process so that you could understand what goes on. Because otherwise it's totally magic. I can talk to you, you can talk to me, and we don't even know how this connection gets made. We just know we open the app on our phone or on our PC and poof, it happens. I was talking to somebody about, using Google Maps as you're driving to avoid traffic. And they said, oh, how does Google do that? They would have to have sensors all along the roadway. And I go, well, they do. It's called all the phones that you're carrying. They're all telling them what's going on. And people just don't realize, the uses and the information that's flowing. And so it's people really have a fundamental misunderstanding. And then it becomes magic. So that's actually a famous science fiction corollary, is that any sufficiently advanced technology is magic. And certainly if you went back 100 years with a laptop, you'd get, burned at the stake or whatever, because that's magic and you're obviously doing witchcraft. So yeah, I take telescopes out at night, right? We have star parties, we set them up, and people think a telescope is a complicated piece of equipment. And I actually encourage kids, I said, here, look down the tube. It's an empty tube. There's a mirror there. That's all that's in here. It's really a simple device. And so yeah, it would be good if kids knew more of the basics of how things work. And that way, they don't all have to know all the specifics, but at least it would be less magical.
So tell me how it works. We're celebrating 60 years of NASA and 50 years of landing on the moon. So they only had 10 years to prepare for this, or was there another aerospace agency before they were created?
Oh, what was NASA before they were NASA? There was, it's one of these things where, the Air Force was doing some things, and they just really needed to bring together, I think, all the different people that were working on it. Shoot, that's a good question, because there was an agency that was out there before NASA, and just offhand, I can't remember, because I wasn't around for that part.
Well, I'm looking it up, especially since now we have the Space Force that is coming up.
Oh my gosh.
What do you think about that?
That is so goofy. We essentially have a Space Force. Especially the Air Force maintains a pretty good presence in space. A lot of people do not remember that the shuttle Atlantis was basically sort of tricked out a little bit extra for the Air Force, and they would go up. Some of those flights were classified missions. And so, they were just kind of quietly done and nobody talked about them. But and now they have an unmanned plane that goes up and stays up, or an unmanned spacecraft, for months at a time, and they don't tell you what it does. People guess, but they don't tell you. So, and the military is always interested in space because it's the high ground, and that's what their aim is always to control. So one interesting thing, though, they love technology as much as anyone, and of course they control GPS, and so one of the reasons other countries are launching their own GPS constellations is because if we're at war with somebody, we cut how good that GPS signal is for the rest of you. The military does not want just everybody getting good location data. So other people are putting up their own satellites to get their own data and not using our stuff. But they also worry that it's pretty easy to disable satellites. You know, every now and then somebody crashes one or blows one up just to demonstrate that. And so they're actually teaching celestial navigation at the Naval Academy again, so that you don't have to depend on GPS. And that's kind of an interesting, what's new again was what was old, and it comes back around.
Before NASA was NACA, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, and it started in March 3rd, 1915. So it's interesting that even back then, when it hasn't been that long from the airplane being invented, they were already thinking about space, and then it became NASA later. But you always wonder, like, why only certain countries are involved in space exploration. Is it really have to do with money, or
it's money?
Is it a crowded field?
It's money, yeah. It's money. India is getting into it, and of course they had the experience of landing on the moon. They just can't talk to their lander, apparently. Whatever, thing went wrong there, which they'll probably figure out and improve on the next time. But it's a tremendous amount of money, although it's getting cheaper. And so I think you will see more people crowding into it. I mean, for example, and people do it as much for status as they do anything else. So India not only wants to have their own satellites, they want to launch them themselves as well. Well, so, them and Pakistan have always had an interesting relationship. So you can imagine that Pakistan might say, well, if India can do it, we ought to be able to do it. And so next thing you know, and of course the United States started things, and then Russia, and then the Europeans didn't want us to be the only people who could do that, so they've got their own space agency, but they do it as a club. So they have the European Space Agency. But yeah, it's partly prestige and partly military, because again, it's where you want to control. If you want control over, what battlefields might come up in the future. Of course, you're not supposed to do any of that in space, but military people aren't paid to think that way. So,
of course, the alien conspiracy theorists and aficionados might be going crazy, because if they're preparing for war in space, that means there must be something coming, or they know something we don't. I actually have you heard of the storming Area 51?
Yeah. Did anything actually happen on that day? It was, I didn't know if anybody actually showed up there.
I thought it was coming. I didn't think it already had happened. But the idea was that people are so fanatical about finding out what's going on over there that they decided to storm it. And then the people from the town, they're like, well, it's turning into a festival. So then if people come, it is controlled and it's not just chaos. So then it turned into Woodstock. And I don't know if they were able to pull it off. But so there's a big interest in declassifying stuff and letting people know about where the aliens are at and things like that. And I'm gonna make a confession in this show, and I want to see what you think. When I was a child, I actually saw a UFO, and it was very strange because I lived in northern Mexico, and we could see a little light in the distance. And then we got our binoculars, and close to this hill there was a spinning ball. It was like a shiny object, and then like little lasers of different colors were coming off of it. And to this day, I still don't believe in UFOs or alien aircraft, because to me it would make more sense that it was some type of military experiment or American / Mexican collaboration for some type of aircraft. Like assuming that everything is aliens to me is very problematic. And a true UFO is an unidentified flying object. Is there stuff that you were aware of that now that we know it was an experiment or something, and that's how people ended up with those ideas?
There are probably more than a few of those. I mean, over the years, they've tested a lot of really strange aircraft, and You know, you can get some pretty weird reflections if you're doing things and maybe you have some yet reflective balloons up or something like that, man. You can get some funky things going on. The military also has tested a lot of laser stuff over the years. You know, astronomers now use lasers to create an artificial point of light that they use to correct the view through their telescopes. And that's fairly sophisticated stuff. They actually deform the mirror of the telescope to match the twinkling of the atmosphere, and they can sharpen the view. Well, when they started thinking about doing that, somebody asked somebody in the military, and they go, ha ha ha, yeah, we've already been doing that. So, because they were thinking about how to keep your laser beam focused when it's going through the atmosphere, because otherwise the atmosphere scatters the beam and makes it big and wide. So they've done lots of experiments, and I don't doubt that more than a few sightings were things like that. It's also true that there are a lot of things that you can see, and you can't tell what you're seeing to save your life. And unless, you know, it's really fun sometimes to when you do figure it out, to say, wow, that totally didn't look like that. It looked like something else completely. So it's pretty easy to get hosed, and your eyes are terrible at night. They can't tell you distance worth a lick. You know, people report shooting stars, meteorites coming in, and they're usually convinced they're right over their head. And if you tell them, no, it's 20, 30, 40 miles high, they go, no, it couldn't possibly have been. It had to be closer. You know, no, it didn't. But so it's really tough sometimes to know what you're looking at. And so people see things that are unidentified. Yeah, I'm with you. It's fine for it to be unidentified. It's, you know, aliens. I tell people there are every night, and it's getting worse now. There are people out there photographing the sky with really good equipment. There's a couple guys who can take a picture of the space station when it passes over, and you can see the astronaut working outside. That's amazing. So they would take some really nice pictures of alien spacecraft. There are a couple of guys who make it their specialty to chase down the classified satellites. They get launched, and the military does not admit to where they're going or into what orbit, and these guys go track them down and find them, and take pictures of them. And the first time they did that, they had a visit from somebody in the military saying, how the heck did you do that? And they tell them, and, oh, well, okay. So, but people enjoy doing that because they don't like secret stuff, and so they're trying really hard to basically out the secret stuff as best they can. So,
and that's my issue with the moon landing hoax that celebrities like Joe Rogan would push, is that what is the benefit, and why would it be that after 50 years nothing has come out? With hundreds of people working on it, somebody would have slipped up, somebody would have gotten frustrated with the lie and gotten the information out. And again, what is the benefit of lying to a group of people when the whole point is that we're trying to push science forward? If it was only for fame or to show that they were more skilled than the Russians, something like that, then that's the problem. Is like there's an assumption that the government is evil and that the scientists are in it, instead of assuming, no, they were actually tried it and it worked. Like, so it's always like, I don't know if you heard, I don't know if it's like a theory that the easiest answer to a question is most likely the answer as compared to the more complicated one.
Yep.
But was there any fear of the unknown? Did they have guns with them? Like, what if there was a monster on the other side of the moon? Like, did anybody even, your knowledge of the moon landing, was there any extra caution that they took for unforeseen issues?
Well, we'd already been around the backside more than once. The Russians actually were the first ones to get around the backside of the moon, which is why the craters over there all have Russian names. So we kind of knew that. We'd landed several things on the moon, so we kind of had some idea that at least you could land. There were a lot of unknowns. One was, how deep does the powder on top go? And if you put something heavy on it, how deep will you sink? And that was, if you listen to Neil's chatter when he came down the ladder, that was one of his observations, was that the pads were sitting on top of the ground, because they weren't entirely sure that that would be true. And it would have been really embarrassing to step off the lander and go 3 feet down in the ground or something. So they wanted to make sure it was a solid surface. They actually did worry about microbes. And so they quarantined those guys for 2 weeks after they came back. And looking back, it kind of seems a bit silly because the moon is pretty dead. But on the other hand, we find life on Earth, miles deep in the rocks. So, maybe it's not so unreasonable. But they were sincerely concerned about that, so they kept them in a box, basically, living in a little trailer for 2 weeks to make sure that they weren't coming down with any germs that could have possibly come from the moon. A good movie on that, by the way, Michael Crichton, before he did Jurassic Park, he did one called The Andromeda Strain, which was basically about that. Some either space rock or whatever brings some microbe to Earth, and of course we have no defense against such a thing, and it's of course horrifically fatal. So anyway, it's a good thriller movie on that, because it's creepy because you can't see. Like the giant dinosaurs you could see coming, but a microbe you can't see it, so it's extra creepy. But so that was something odd that they did worry about. They worried real hard about their suits, and sometimes the guys got a little enthusiastic, especially on the later missions where they would kind of get going hopping fast, and the guys at NASA were like, please don't do that, because if you fall down and get a hole in that suit, that's not good either. It turned out that the moon dust was more abrasive than they thought it would be. It really wore out their Kevlar suits. And it turned out, and this doesn't get talked a lot about either, because the astronauts are heroes and they're really great guys, and we did this thing. They were coughing like crazy, a lot of them, especially when they were still in the lunar module, because they would bring that dust in, and that dust is like shards of glass, and it's very abrasive to your lungs. So it was not an easy atmosphere, and to clean it up was really hard. So basically it was good that they could make the lunar module dirty and then leave that when they went back to the main command module. So there were lots of challenges that, were some expected, some unexpected. On landing, the computer had too many instructions coming at it. It had not the computing power of probably your, Echo or, whatever thing you have that turns off and on lights automatically. So, we didn't, you didn't have a 4-function calculator then. I mean, imagine the day that you did not have, in school, they didn't require TI calculators because they didn't make them. And so, we really did go with bear skins and stone knives, in a lot of senses before we were ready. And I think that's part of the reason we didn't go back, because we weren't doing it in any kind of sustainable or way that you could build upon the things. They were all just one-off visits, and they were hard to do and painful to do and super expensive. So after a while, it was kind of like, okay, we've done enough of that. And nobody had a reason to be there. So, and I'm still not sure we have a reason as human beings to go back, but there's still plenty of enthusiasm for doing that. So, the Indian mission was to land, it did land in a crater that's suspected to have a fair bit of water content. And so that's something that they'll investigate from orbit as best they can, but they were hoping to do some on-the-ground measurements as well. And again, it's a testament to, so the Indians are there in orbit, they can look down and see things on the ground. If the Indians want to make sure we landed in 1969, they can find the remnants of the landers on the moon. They can see the tracks that people left. And one of the more interesting things we left on the moon were some reflective boxes that have the property of, you shoot a light beam in and it comes back out the same direction you shot it in. And we laser range the moon. People bounce lasers that start on telescopes on Earth, bounce it off the moon, and the beam comes back to see how far away the moon is exactly. And so we still use those that were left there on the moon. But anyway, there's, yeah, it would be hard to lie because first I would have thought the Russians would have outed us right then. And then the Chinese, have been to the moon, and they're presently on the backside with their rover. You hardly hear about that in the U.S. press, but it's actually a pretty successful mission because it's gone through several lunar nights, and it's a 2-week-long night, and it gets cold, and it's hard to keep your electronics going. So they've done a pretty outstanding job keeping their little rover going for a while. So yeah, there's enough people out there and doing stuff that if somebody wanted to say, hey, you guys didn't really come here, they could do that.
Well, we want to thank you for being on the show. I know that the topic of the show is going to be the moon landing and the debunking the hoax. Is there anything else you can tell our audience that is just so silly to think that everything is a conspiracy and everything we're being lied about? And there's things that don't even, again, there's no benefit. But there is benefit if America can show that they're more powerful or more capable, then other countries would be scared of us. Do you think that a lot of it was type of macho, show of a show of strength and power, or was it this genuine, we need to do this for the sake of humanity?
Well, I think there was definitely a huge push to do it, to show that we could do it. We were so embarrassed after Sputnik. And I was not old enough quite to get this, but people say that when they showed up for school the next week after that, their teacher said, you know what, we're going to learn science now. We were just so embarrassed that they got something up. And then after that, they had a whole string of firsts. They had the first person. They had the first spacewalk. So we were really feeling like, oh my gosh, we're so far behind the ball. And the military guys are saying, oh man, if they can control that space, then they could threaten us any which way. So it was very important militarily, and for that, we're America, we should be. And you have to remember that back then those ideologies were competing too. Is socialism a better way to go than capitalism? And so for the capitalist country to be second place like that was just intolerable. So, yeah, there was a lot of that. That was a lot of the push, and that justified the spending. I mean, I don't think they actually did anything other than say, give us as much money as it takes, which you totally couldn't get away with that now. So, yeah, there was a huge amount of that. I mean, in the end, I think the humanity part of it just came. I don't know that the military guys really expected that, because when those guys came back and after they let them out of the 2-week isolation, everybody on the planet was welcoming them for parades, because the feeling wasn't that America had done it. The feeling truly became, we humans did this. Look at this. We walked on the moon. That's amazing. And so that part of it came secondarily, but it, I think, became more than it would have been. So that was kind of the fun benefit, that people saw it as a good thing. And I know Neil Tyson likes to say that those years when we were going to space and when we took those first pictures where we could see the entire planet, and that was one of the Apollo, I think it was 8 that went to the moon and back around in just a figure 8, took that marble Earth picture, and you look back and it's one planet. There are no lines or divisions for countries, and it's just hanging there in space. And then you get a sense of, holy heck, we are all in this together. And that's the years that the EPA got started, that a lot of things where, again, we started taking better care. We cleaned up our water and our air. And so if it gives us that perspective, that's just a great thing. But it did become more than it was at the start. But it was, the push came from, oh my gosh, we cannot be second in technology or in military. So the Russians, bless their hearts, tried really hard. Their Werner von Braun dude actually died right in the middle of their push to get to the moon themselves, and that really hurt them. They were trying to launch a spacecraft that looked very much like the Falcon Heavy. It had like 28 engines or something, and they could not, with the technology of the day, get all those engines to work together, and they ended up blowing them all up. The only reason the Falcon Heavy works is that we have a lot better computers today. So that's kind of interesting that, technology, again, comes back around to the same idea, but we weren't ready for it when they were trying it. But they were trying. They actually launched, and again, this isn't covered in school, they launched a craft that was going to land with no people, but their intent was to pick up a sample from the moon and get it back before the Apollo 11 guys got back to say, look, we brought a moon rock back first. I mean, that's how badly everybody wanted to be first. And unfortunately, that actually crashed. So, it was a huge we want to be first thing, and proved that our way of doing things, which I don't think it really had anything to do with it, but, we had some pretty good people, and they had some pretty good people. So, but again, there are some fascinating stories that didn't come out of the Soviet Union until, things changed there. If you ever want a really gritty story about what it was like to be an astronaut, the first guy that walked in space, when they came home, their spacecraft went off target and they ended up in Siberia. And they spent a couple nights sitting in their capsule, freezing, trying to stay warm before somebody could come rescue them. And so it was like such a contrast. They're sitting there thinking, I just walked in space, and now I'm sitting here freezing in Siberia. And literally people had to come like almost with dog sleds to get them. So there was so much going on, and we were pushing the envelope so hard. But at the same time, we're so competitive as a species. That's one of the things one of our characteristics. It's driven us to inhabit the whole planet, to do some amazing things. And it's, I think, good when we can challenge or channel our competitiveness in positive ways, rather than sometimes the negative things that we end up doing.
If we haven't been able to incrementally go to the moon and build stations there, why push it forward to go to Mars? And then it's inhospitable at the moon, and then it's even more inhospitable at Mars because now you're dealing with atmosphere and closer to the sun and things like that. So to me, it just seems like, sorry to bring in religion or spirituality. It's like, it seems like God didn't mean for us to go because it's just so impossible. Can you tell us the reason to go to Mars if we've been struggling with the moon?
Well, my own reason, if someone were to ask me if I wanted to go to Mars, I'd say yes, because science. Mars is in many, many ways much more Earth-like than just about any other place in the solar system. Biggest volcano, biggest canyon, used to be a warmer, wetter place. I mean, there's so many signs that water used to flow on the planet, and that's what we're interested in if we're looking for life. And so, obviously, there's nobody walking around the surface, but again, microbes are what you're looking for. And so we have the rovers, and those are good because we don't feel real bad when they quit working or if they crash. But they can only do so much. It's phenomenally hard to move them around and to get them places. They have only a limited suite of instruments. A human being could do more science in 2 weeks than a rover can in 2 years. But I might agree with you on the living there. It's somewhat more hospitable than the moon in that there is more accessible water. We actually do know about a lot of frozen water underground. Little tiny bit of atmosphere, but that's not really helpful, not for humans. So you'd be living underground. I mean, I don't see a permanent colony because I just can't see how that would even be self-sustainable myself. But why go? Because it's there. Why did people race to get to the South Pole? I mean, it's a lonely place with nothing but ice, and yet people did that. And we've never really been, we have a sort of small presence of scientists in Antarctica, but they get cycled in and out. Nobody actually lives there. Nobody raises their kids there. So in many ways, Antarctica is probably one of the better analogs for Mars on planet Earth. It's not a place you would live. It's a place you might go and hopefully get back from. But it's a long trip.
And I'm glad that you give us that perspective, because when people try to compare it to the discovery of the Americas or something like that, it's not the same thing. And my brother and I, he was we tried to study science and it didn't work out. But we talk about how if you go to Mars and you run out of screws or you don't have the right wrench, there's no stores or anywhere to find them. I know you can bring a 3D a scanner or a 3D printer, but that's really the problem. Is like the closest place to get resources would be a space station or some type of docking thing, and like it's just such a perilous journey. Like you're stuck in the middle of nowhere and with no ability to get back. So to me, it just seems like a suicide mission. Like you would send someone who doesn't want to come back.
Well, you might do that, and you know, maybe if you're old enough and whatever, you'd say, okay, I can spend 5-10 years and contribute to science or whatever. But yeah, you won't have access to medical care, and so yeah, it'd be tough. I mean, they like people, like I said, when they go to Antarctica, they would prefer it if you didn't have an appendix and you didn't have your wisdom teeth, because they don't want those kind of medical emergencies because they can't deal with them. So yeah, that would be a problem. But, some of it is just engineering, and so we'll just have to see what people do. There are lots of environments here on Earth that people could theoretically inhabit, and we don't. And we don't because it's expensive and hard and painful. Nobody builds, puts cities on the bottom of the ocean, any number of places. There's even half the planet we don't inhabit because it's, too dry, too cold, whatever. So I would think that if you're concerned about human beings, having only one planet, then maybe you should just take really good care of this one. Would be a great idea. Because there's no way to move any number of people off planet in any case. So take good care of Earth. I mean, it's got everything we need, and other places, no other place does. Every other place you're going to be really stretched. Have you ever read the novel Dune? That's an old science fiction classic. The book is pretty good, but it's basically about an extremely desert planet, and the people there live with suits that reclaim all their sweat, everything so that they can have enough water. And I think Mars is going to be like that, except on steroids. I mean, you're never going to have lots of water. You'd always be living on the edge, and it's an unforgiving environment that would do its level best to kill you. So, it's not a friendly place. And again, you're not going to go there and raise your kids. You're just not. Nobody even knows what that would look like in 1/3 gravity. And certainly if you're long enough outside of Earth's gravity, your muscles aren't going to be worth anything when you come back. They have the guys that go up to space station. They spend 6 months up there, and they exercise a couple of hours every single day, just so they're not jelly when they come home. So, it's just not easy. Now, having said that, people do want to go. So we'll wait and see.
Well, tell me about the ethical part of it, because just like you, I agree that we need to take care of this spaceship and this environment, and we're not, and we're spending millions of dollars now, even private corporations, in trying to get to Mars, when we should be investing in opportunities to keep this place going. So is there something within you that tells you, like, should I really be supporting space exploration instead of sustainability on Earth? Because I know you can believe and support many things at once, but now it's coming to the point of, like, unless we do something, we won't even make it to anywhere else because this place is burning up. And like you said, if there is opportunity for people to live in extreme weather conditions, or the fear is always that if global warming is rapidly destroying the planet, are we going to need suits to be able to handle the heat, or are we going to need something else to be able to live close to places that now are on the water? Like, why aren't we preparing for that type of disaster scenario instead of trying to create another disaster somewhere else?
Well, I will say that NASA's budget is actually vanishingly small. It's right now 0.5% of the U.S. budget, and that takes care of the space station, which is fairly expensive and all that, and all of the missions that we have. And some of the things we learn about do have direct impact on what we do here on Earth. For example, I tell people, it's hard to learn about something when you have an example of one. And so one planet, you learn a lot about it, but for example, weather. We would like to have a better handle, even to model what we're doing with global warming. So you need more examples. So studying the weather on Venus, which had runaway greenhouse effect, might be something that would then inform us about what we're doing here. So some of those things are good to study because it's going to teach us more about our own planet. The sun affects us quite a lot, so studying the sun is also a pretty important thing. And with the way our power grids and our dependence really on a lot of the satellite technology is now, that also becomes important because the sun can be a major factor in taking satellites down. So there is a lot of space exploration that really can do positive impacts on what we do on Earth, and for the most part, it's cheap. Now, I will say that at least Elon Musk, who owns SpaceX, and when people ask when will that be a public company, well, the day he gets to Mars. But a lot of what he's doing has two things he's looking at. One is he does want to improve things on Earth, so he's investing in electric technology and solar technology so that the cars aren't using gas and we're getting rid of coal-fired power plants. But everything that he does has two purposes. One is you're going to use solar everything on Mars. He's got a drilling company, and that's, again, you're going to be living underground on Mars. It's just amazing to me the different technologies he's invested in that all actually have to do with space travel, but they can also improve things here on Earth. So Tesla has made electric cars a real thing, which they weren't for many, many years. And I'd like to own a Roadster myself, but I don't have money for that. But so it's interesting the way that some of the technology, even though you think, well, it's just kind of being wasted on space, and yet it feeds back into what we can do here. The satellites that are being launched now are bringing communications to places that never had it before. Places like Bangladesh now can afford to have their own communication satellite to bring TV and internet to their disparate small villages and stuff. So there's good things from that, and hopefully looking back at our planet and being able to catalog the changes that are going on, because people, I'm sitting here in Tennessee, I'm not going to get coastal flooding, so it's hard for me personally maybe to see the impact of global warming. And so it'd be easy for me to sit back and say, well, I don't have to worry about none of that. But when you see the pictures of places flooding that never flooded before, when you see the images of, holy heck, look at all the glacier that just left Greenland, then it can start to make the impacts a little more real. And I think that over time that's having more of an impact on people to kind of wake people up and say, hey, maybe we do need to actually care or pay attention to this. So hopefully most of it's in a positive sense.
Can you give us an update on what's going on with your field of study? And last summer there was things going on with Mars being close to the Earth. So is there anything happening this fall that we should be keeping an eye out for?
Let's see, what's going on? We got a new comic coming. That's kind of fun. There's probably 200 that come every year, but not many that come in like this one. This guy looks like he came from interstellar space. It's going to come about as close as Mars and then fling back off again. But that's always interesting. Let's see, we have spacecraft Solar Probe Parker that's actually studying the sun in a very close way. It's got a super duper heat shield on one side, but it actually gets extremely close to the sun. And so it's studying the solar corona, that extended atmosphere that we only see when we have a solar eclipse. And they're trying to understand how the sun kind of heats that, and then how that feeds into the solar wind that then blows by us. Let's see, the Japanese have had a spacecraft at Venus, but I'm not sure what it's doing at the moment. Of course, we've still got Curiosity on Mars, and next year, so Mars comes close about every 2 years. So last year it was close, this year it's on the far side of the sun, next year it'll come back around, or we'll catch up to it again and lap it. And so we'll be launching for Mars again with a rover called Mars 2020. It'll get a better name. And the Europeans are going to try again. They crash landed the last time. So there's people studying Mars. We have a spacecraft at Jupiter called Juno that's been doing some fascinating work that will eventually let us decide how much of a solid center or maybe not solid center Jupiter has. And looking at the magnetic field there, we just approved a mission that will fly by Europa, one of Jupiter's large moons, to take a look at a icy covering there. Europa appears to have an icy outside, but a warm saltwater ocean under that. And that ocean could contain more water than what's on the surface of planet Earth. So we would really like to have a look underneath that ice. We're not going to get that for a very long time, but we might be able to discern how deep the shell is and maybe get a look if there are cracks and fissures where there's stuff leaking out. So that's going to be a little bit of fun. It all tries your patience, though, because it takes so long to get places. And then we're looking forward to the James Webb Space Telescope. Maybe it will finally launch in the next couple of years. And if it works the way it's supposed to, it will actually enable us to look at the atmospheres of planets going around other stars. And so then we can start to explore that question. And this is sort of ties back to aliens, all right? How many places out there that we can find look even a little bit like Earth, or have atmospheres that appear to have oxygen, or can we see in the spectra, can we see chlorophyll in somebody's atmosphere? That would be kind of fun and exciting. So there's a lot kind of coming up that's going to give us a larger perspective. Again, all we had is our own example, and so this would give us more of a broader picture. How, or are we really that special? And I have to tell you that just cataloging the exoplanets, there aren't a whole lot of them that really look very much like Earth at all. So we are kind of special. We've looked at a lot of planets, and none of them look like Kansas. So, yeah, planets that go around stars other than the sun. And I think we're approaching 4,000 of them right now, which is actually quite a few. So that's pretty amazing. So anyway, there's a lot going on, a lot of exciting things we might learn in the next decade or two. And none of that really has to do with human exploration. That's all things that our cheerful little robots are doing for us. But that's pretty good. What we really need is some interplanetary broadband so that all of our spacecraft that are out there can talk back to us. Because right now, it's kind of like, you remember when dial-up was a thing, and it was really slow, and we really didn't have the internet the way we have it now, because you couldn't send video. There was just not enough speed, not enough bandwidth. So right now we just have like 3 or 4 big telescopes on Earth that listen to all the spacecraft that are out there, and they have to send their data back real slow so that we can hear it clearly. So, for example, the mission that flew by Pluto, it took a year to get all that data back down. So we really could use some better communications between planets so that we can send our pictures back with some speed. And yeah, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And that's just planetary work. I mean, there's always fun things. We saw the first sort of image of a black hole, and we'll get the one from our own black hole in the center of the Milky Way here shortly, and that'll be pretty cool to see what our own black hole looks like. And so there's some cool stuff going on.
So is one of the problems interference from, because the one part of the universe that I find very strange is black matter, and how we still don't know what it is, and who knows, we might be swimming in an ocean of who knows what. So what do you know about that, and is that one of the problems that once the further it goes out, the harder it is to get quality data.
The dark matter problem is kind of interesting because we don't know what it is. We just pretty sure that it is because when you look at how gravity affects things, you can do some really simple calculations to find out how much stuff is, in a space. And when you look at a galaxy, it looks like there's a whole lot more matter than what we see visually. So accounting for the stuff that's missing is a problem, and so far we have ideas, but nothing really good. And dark energy is even worse, and that's just, to me, theoreticians going off the rails. But I could be wrong. So they're seeing the universe, when we measure the expansion rate, it looks like that's changed a bit over time, and then in fact it's actually accelerating a little bit recently. And so there has to be some kind of a force there doing that. So they just call it dark energy. It's like writing "Here be dragons" on the map when you don't know what's there. And so again, we have no idea what it is. So there's a lot of theoretical investigation, and a lot of that actually is happening on planet Earth, where we're using our atom smashers to investigate the very small world of quantum mechanics to see what's actually going on there. And that's so weird that we basically just have to make up models for our brains because otherwise you can't understand it. But in space, the biggest problem is just that you're talking back to Earth with an antenna that's, like what an old dish antenna out in the yard used to look like. And that can only put out so many watts. But you have to make this phone call, across millions of miles. So, yeah, here's a dish sitting on Earth in the middle of all of our TV, radio, and internet conversations, trying to hear this tiny little few watts coming back. And, yeah, it's noisy and it's hard to do. I think what you will see eventually is you'll see radio telescopes on the moon, because the moon will be nice and quiet. And you'll be able to hear something from there. So we might see, that would be a reasonable use to me of some space on the moon, is to put up a couple of good radio telescopes up there. They don't need people to run them. They can just set up there and be happy. But yeah, it's interesting that it's hard actually to get information back.
Have you heard of the theory from, there's a gentleman in Houston who keeps on coming on the radio and says that he wants to reflect the sunlight from the moon to the Earth and create a source of energy from that. Have you heard of those theoretical plans?
Yeah, and it's sort of an engineering problem again, where, yeah, you'd put some big reflectors, and you could either put them on the moon or you could just hang them out in space. Big mirrors that would concentrate light and beam it back down. Yeah, it's a huge engineering problem, though. And you'd have to be really good with your stuff, because if you send a pretty concentrated beam of energy, you want to make sure it hits the receiving station and nothing else. So some of the simulation games that people like to play actually incorporate that technology into the game. It's kind of fun. I know the Japanese were looking at it in a real serious way, because they're kind of short on resources that way. They don't have a whole lot of oil and gas. They would like to get off nuclear, but it's not super sunny there either. So they were seriously looking at that kind of technology. So we might see that get developed along the way too, where you would, because there's infinite amount of sunlight just about out there that you could capture and beam back. But how to beam it back without, heating the atmosphere, or, again, hitting something you don't mean to hit with a beam of energy, it's an engineering challenge. So it'll be fun to see what people do with that. But that is a serious idea.
Well, thanks again for being on the show and being a faithful supporter of this program by always being ready to share about science, about astronomy, and about ways that we can all learn from each other. So thank you again, Ms. Theo Wellington.
Oh, you're more than welcome. We'll catch up to you later.
Take care.